If you've ever struggled from anxiety, you already know that it's very difficult sometimes to bring yourself down from those heightened states. And you may already know some techniques that are for in those moments. But what I'm going to be talking to you about today is a method that you can use to bring down your anxiety overall. Today's video is sponsored by MagicMind. More about that later in today's video. Konstantin Buteyko was born in a place that you might have heard of recently. It was a place called Kiev in Ukraine. The regular quote that his mother would say about him is, "I gave birth to a very odd boy." Being a genius must be like an exciting thing or just a terrible, awful thing to have happen to you. His father was a mechanic and he was really good at all this mechanical stuff. And so he went to World War II working a lot of different jobs on the front line. But one job he couldn't do that he really wanted to do was being a doctor. He saw all this suffering. He saw all these people, maimed and mangled and things like that. And he said, I need to be able to help these people. What do you do when you're a genius? You're like, okay, I'm a mechanical genius. I see people I want to help. No matter what the machine is, it all has to work as a whole. If you know anything about Buteyko and his Buteyko method later on, you'll know, oh yeah, well that makes a lot of sense. I'll become a medical genius as well. He specialized in hypertension or high blood pressure. That is also something that he developed a terrible case of. It was going to be lethal for him. It was something that was going to lead to a very early death. As the story goes, one day he was looking out at the stars through the window and a bright light shined very brightly, and he had to look away, and he looked down at his chest and his belly, and he noticed he was breathing very heavy. And he started to wonder, I wonder if the way that I breathe is connected to the way that I feel. Ever the scientist, he decided to start doing research on himself, so he started doing a lot more breathing. His hypertension got worse, and he actually started having a lot more chest pain. Okay, well maybe if I breathe less, and he reduced the volume of his breath. And that's when he started to notice his chest pain started to reduce, his hypertension started to go away simply by changing his breathing. This is how he started to develop the Buteyko method. He was at the hospital and he noticed there's a person having an asthma attack. So he said, okay, try this. The guy came out of the asthma attack really quickly, started feeling better. He started teaching this method to just anybody and everybody, which would be awesome if it wasn't for the fact that other human beings are involved. The whole medical community hated him. And his friends were like, hey, listen, man, you're gonna get thrown in an asylum. You're doing everything wrong. And he's like, hey, but I'm curing these people using just breathing. That's pretty cool, isn't it? He knew that if he wanted to continue doing this kind of work, he couldn't stay in Moscow. There was a grant that had just been given out to a hospital in Siberia where they keep the gulags. He said, if I go out there, nobody's gonna be on my back. I'll be able to continue my work. Started curing people, especially with asthma. That was the big one. Said, I think the actual cause is over-breathing. Still to this day, doctors discuss what is the cause of asthma. So out in Siberia, not only did the doctors not like him, they started to try to sabotage him. Next thing you know, Konstantin Buteyko was getting death threats. They went to his laboratory, stole all of his equipment, fired his whole staff. His dark hair started to turn gray at this point. Well, do you think it stopped Konstantin Buteyko? Of course it did not. His mother might have thought he was odd. Maybe it's odd that he didn't give up. They poisoned him and he lived through it. They did hit jobs on him. One time they did like this mob style hit. They crashed a car into his car. You better quit it with this breathing thing, Konstantin, or you'll be sleeping with the fish. Like his whole career, he had to put up with this stuff. He was helping all these people get off of their medications and to live longer, healthier lives. Meanwhile, avoiding assassination. He, later on in his life, he claimed, and many other people claimed, that he became clairvoyant. I don't know, but that was part of the story. Later on in his life, as he was a very old man, some guy came up and just like hit him over the head, beat the hell out of him. And he lived through it. He died pretty much soon thereafter. Konstantin Buteyko was the first to really double down on the value of CO2. His method has helped thousands and thousands of people. Many of you guys may be familiar with Patrick McEwen, who's really taken up the torch of the Buteyko clinic. He also adapted Buteyko for the use with athletes, and he calls it the oxygen advantage. CO2 tolerance is the #1 thing that a person can do to improve their athletic performance. There's a correlation between a person's CO2 tolerance and the resilience to all stressors. And this has a lot to do with the fact that CO2 is intimately connected to your urge to breathe. When your CO2 levels rise, rise, the trigger to breathe happens, and so you take a breath. And we don't think about it, this is just something that naturally happens. If we can raise a person's CO2 tolerance, allow a person to tolerate more CO2 in their blood, that trigger for breath is delayed, and a person will breathe more smoothly and more relaxed all throughout the day. There is a connection, an absolute connection between how fast you're breathing and your autonomic state. Every organ that you have is influenced by your autonomic state. By training your CO2 tolerance, what we see is that we're making a person more resilient to all stressors. And speaking of being a genius, I am not a genius. That is why I use MagicMind. Be honest, you know what this stuff is? How much of this garbage have you poured down your throat? That's what you need right here. It's all right there. Today's video is sponsored by MagicMind. I'm a huge proponent of using natural nootropics to improve cognitive function. I started doing this back in graduate school, especially experimenting with phosphatidylserine, bacopa, and L-theanine. All three of those are in this supplement. Unlike caffeine, unlike phenylalanine, a lot of those supplements that are for the here and now, this awesome little shot is both helpful today, and then as you continue to take it, it has long-term health benefits. In addition to that, it does have a little bit of caffeine, but not very much. It's got 35 milligrams that you can use it on its own, or you can use it in conjunction with your daily coffee or whatever caffeine source you like in the mornings. If you're interested in trying MagicMind for yourself, maybe cultivating that inner genius, for a 20% discount, take a look at the code below. Now back to Buteyko. When it comes to breathwork, there's all sorts of breathwork techniques that we can use in the moment. Okay, I'm feeling stressed out, I'm freaking out. Okay, I'm gonna start doing this technique or that technique. But how do we make it so that you don't get to that state quite so often, or maybe ever? The Buteyko method utilizes a variety of techniques within the full method. So it's not a single technique. There's many techniques within the Buteyko method. The primary focus of the Buteyko method is for using the nose, remembering that mouth breathing leads to over breathing. But there is a technique that is very common amongst Buteyko practitioners. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to guide you through. Come to a nice seated position. Find a relaxed pose, and bring your awareness to your breath. Reduce the speed of your breath and the volume of your breath to the point that if you were to breathe any slower or with any less volume, you would feel an air hunger. Just find that point. Now, once you've found basically the edge, that edge between feeling a little breath hunger and not, we're going to reduce the volume of each breath just a little bit, just enough so that you feel a slight air hunger, and maintain that. We're not trying to have an intense air hunger, just a nice, mild air hunger that you can sustain, remaining relaxed within your breath. Relax your shoulders, your chest, relax your eyebrows. Maintaining that low volume in the breath while still bringing it down into the belly. Observe the coolness of the breath as it enters your nostrils, and the warm, now moistened air as it leaves your nostrils. Just focus on this breath. Remember that slight air hunger is just an illusion, really. You have plenty of oxygen in your cells. In fact, this higher level of CO2 facilitates better oxygen absorption in your tissues. Just relax. Maintaining that air hunger. And just for this little experiment, we will end the air hunger. You can start to breathe a little bit, but don't gasp. Don't take any deep breaths. Just slowly come back to normal breathing. And now you should be back at normal breathing. You have completed a short exercise in the Buteyko method.